Thank you so much. I love the energy in the room, and I'm delighted, again, to have you all here. I hope you enjoyed this morning's sessions as they followed upon all of the issues that we discussed yesterday. And I'm honored to be able to wrap up our conference with what I hope will be a very engaging closing plenary session. I'm pleased to be the moderator for today's session. I was told once that the definition of a moderator is somebody who is never responsible for a good session, but is always responsible for a poor one. And without advocating my responsibility, I will say I have no doubt that this will be a very, very good session. We have a terrific mix of institutions and wonderful panelists with us today. I would like to emphasize that this is a plenary session. We've all been engaged in conversations over the past 2 days. We all have questions. We have this last opportunity to talk through some of the issues, specifically as they relate to the ways in which MOOCs might shape on-campus teaching. And so I ask that you participate in this session. I will be scanning the audience for hands if you'd like to ask a question, or if you'd like to step to either of these microphones at any point during the session. I would be more than happy to take questions from the floor and direct them to our panelists. My hope is that this becomes a lively conversation rather than a series of presentations. Well, let's begin by introducing our panelists. So here to my immediate left is Tang Eng Chye, who is Deputy President for Academic Affairs and Provost at the National University of Singapore. A professor of mathematics, Provost Tang oversees NUS deans and their schools and faculties, and he directs academic policy. To his left is Nancy Zimpher, Chancellor of the State University of New York. Chancellor Zimpher runs the nation's largest comprehensive system of higher education and is a nationally recognized leader in teacher preparation, urban education, and university community engagement. To her left is Margaret Sheil, Provost at the University of Melbourne. Provost Sheil leads the development and delivery of the Melbourne curriculum and is a Fellow of the Royal Australian Chemical Institute and the Academy of Technological Sciences and Engineering. And last but not least, to her left is Richard DeMillo, Distinguished Professor of Computing at the Georgia Institute of Technology. Professor DeMillo is Director of Georgia Tech's Center for 21st Century Universities and has served in a number of roles in the private sector, including as Chief Technology Officer for Hewlett-Packard. So we do have an absolutely wonderful panel. And I thought before we started, it might be helpful if each described some of the context surrounding the work that they're doing, some of the institutional differences represented here, because we do have an array of very, very different institutions. And so perhaps I can turn to you for a description, very briefly, of NUS.
Well, thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Let me just briefly explain why NUS is interested in MOOCs. First point I want to make is that in terms of students, I think that their way of learning has changed. I look at my son, who has just finished grade 12, and how he works. He works on a desktop. He MSN at the same time with his notebook, and he has his earphones on. Right? You may think that they can't multitask, but well, in his case, I think he managed to do sufficiently well to get into university. So I think this is very different from, say, 20, 30 years ago. Right? So that's one sort of key impetus why we are looking at our educational system. Now, the second point is that technology, I think I don't have to impress you on this point. Technology has changed the society and will change the way learning is done. And we feel that technology plays a very important part. And that's why we feel that it is very important, it is imperative for NUS to go on this route of how to leverage on technology to improve learning outcomes. And the way why we see MOOC, I think MOOC is actually a very innovative platform that has leveraged on technology to really improve teaching outcomes. And we see MOOC as a part of our journey on leveraging on technology. So that's why NUS is in this.
Nancy, a bit about SUNY.
I will speak to the State University of New York and probably be persistent throughout this panel in relating individual institutional activity to a word that we use more often than not called systemness, where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, and how we can build collaborations and broader impact by working more effectively together. So for us, this means 64 campuses across the state of New York, 30 of which are community colleges, so we have the real opportunity to translate or create a pathway from community colleges to baccalaureate institutions to doctoral institutions, and so transfer and job readiness, placement and career are all really incredibly important aspects of our work. We educate 465,000 students annually, and we have a faculty of 88,000 faculty and staff. So our catchment zone is primarily state-based. Most of our students are educated from New York and plan to stay in New York, but we also have a large international effort. So I think I'm going to represent the utility of the MOOC as embedded in an already massive online degree structure. We have 150 or more online degree programs, 7,000 online courses, and we serve about 100,000 students as subscribers. But our goal is to create a thing we're calling Open SUNY, which is a very large online operation where we can embed MOOCs and borrow, use online courses from other institutions to educate another 100,000 students. Over 60% of New York is undereducated, so we have our work cut out for us. Thank you.
Thanks. Margaret, University of Melbourne.
So, I turned on? No. Yeah, okay. So the University of Melbourne is a large public university, much like the public universities here in the US, where around 50,000 students, about a third of those, or 27%, are international, predominantly from Asia. And about 16,000 are graduates. So we in an unusual move for an Australian university, shifted to a much more US style of curriculum with a series of broad-based undergraduate degrees, and then moving our professional degrees to the graduate space. And we're involved in this kind of activity, primarily because we're looking to what it does in terms of our global aspirations and our what we'll learn about, in common with all those of us here, I think, about what this will mean for our on-campus teaching, but we're particularly interested in the international dimension to this.
Terrific. And Rich?
I'm from Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech is a public university. We're part of the university system of Georgia. About 22,000 students, approximately evenly split between graduate and undergraduate. Although we're a broadly based university, most of our students are in engineering, computing, and we have significant professional education activities. We have significant international activities. I lead, I think, an interesting organization. It's an internal think tank for the provost, and our charter is to experiment with, prototype, demonstrate new approaches, not only technology approaches, but new approaches to organizing the university and curriculum. So this recent activity with Coursera and the MOOC experiment in general kind of grows out of a tradition at Georgia Tech for prototyping new ways of doing things. Maybe despite the fact we don't have an engineering or an education school, or maybe because we don't have an education school, we've sort of given our faculty license to go out and try things out, and my center is focused on activity of that.
So we thought it would be helpful just to situate our discussion in the context of these very different institutional designs. Penn being a private institution, 12 different schools, actually half of our faculty in our School of Medicine. and the ways in which institutional design plays into our thinking about how we might deploy MOOCs, particularly as they might affect teaching on campus, which is our theme today. So there are at least 4 ways, certainly many more, but at least 4 ways to think about the impact of open courses on on-campus teaching. They have to do with how these affect instructors, how they affect students, how they might affect pedagogy, and finally how they might start to affect curriculum. And my hope is that we can touch on each of those topics today. But let's start with the last, on this question of curriculum. And let me turn to Rich just briefly for a few words on, at Georgia Tech at least, how you see curriculum being shaped by open courses.
Yeah, so kind of building on my last comments about there being an appetite for prototyping, our involvement with MOOCs was really a bottom-up kind of affair. We decided that we would conduct experiments, that we would try these things. And of course, the danger of these kinds of experiments is that things get away from you, and here we are with 20 MOOCs after 1 year. I think the interesting thing from my standpoint is the extent to which this has been a bottom-up activity at Georgia Tech. There's been very little top-down direction. Thou shalt investigate this, and our initial approach to integrating MOOCs into the curriculum was to look at the line of faculty members outside the door to see who was interested. And it turns out that there were a lot of faculty interested. Now, the question, after we've done our first 20, what's our next 20 going to look like? And I think at this point, there's going to be much more intentionality at Georgia Tech with that next 20 set of courses is probably more like existing Georgia Tech courses, more like existing courses that fit into our curriculum in the first 20. Although I have to say, even though it's a strategic way of looking at MOOCs, again, this is a very bottom-up thing. We have a council on educational technology that's entirely faculty-driven, and the idea for getting a strategic intention behind the next 20 came from the faculty.
Nancy, I assume you come at this from a somewhat different perspective from the system level.
Yeah, I do. I'm reminded to say, first of all, about the tyranny of the or. So we have the spontaneous development of MOOCs, much like you've had at Georgia Tech, but I would overlay that with sort of a social proposition, that we are obliged to get more people educated, fully educated, and so we have to pay attention to the way we construct curriculum and what the outcome is for our students. So while MOOCs may bring us more spontaneity, more individual freedom on the part of very creative faculty who are developing MOOCs and various topics, we also have to keep an eye on whether our students can transfer from 2-year community colleges to 4-year, or in fact, we have a lot of 4-year students who transfer back to 2-year. So the design of the curriculum in some coherent, almost guaranteed way that what you're building will have currency to the next level of your education is really important to a large public system. And the second thing that we really have to pay attention to is the workforce demands of our state. So if you're at the high end of educating and you're educating an elite population, whether they're first generation learners or middle and upper class students, you may not pay as much attention or not feel obliged to pay as much attention, but we are really charged to create a workforce. And I don't mean just a commercial business and industry workforce, but to make sure people are gainfully employed and trained. And so our use of MOOCs, I'm guessing, is going to have to be a little bit more structured because we've got to fill curricular gaps.
Perhaps I can explain our framing for this. I think that there are two components here. If you look at education for the future, or even right now, I think there are two pieces that are quite evident. One is lots of information, right? And the other one is complexity. And the way we think about it is that if we want our graduates to be productive citizens, to be effective in the workforce, there are at least certain traits or attributes that you need to ingrain in them. One is the they have to really understand the mode of analysis, inquiry in a particular discipline. I think our current way of teaching is probably not as efficient in dishing out, in fleshing out this particular aspect. The second is on independence of learning. All right, how a student can go to parts of the information and then retrieve the information as and when he or she needs it. And this too, I think we feel that, or at least I feel that MOOC and Coursera actually has done very well, in the sense that when you squeeze a course into 6 weeks, all right, you force a person to focus on what are really the key ingredients, all right, and your learning analytics in a way helps to guide the student in thinking, in how to approach, in the mode of inquiry in the subject. I think if we can actually continue to push along this, it can lead to really a huge change in these two particular aspects. Now there's a third component which I don't think is still quite clear right now. I mentioned about complexity, about lots of information. You can't teach your students everything. Neither can you expect your students to watch all the videos, right? There has to be a certain scaffold for knowledge in which your students will know it. And this scaffold is not just within the discipline. In fact, it is so multidisciplinary. You have to have scaffold within the discipline and across the entire disciplines, and you need to be able to connect across disciplines. I think this one is more challenging. But I think what I'm heartened to hear is that MOOC, people who have offered MOOCs, they have now been taking very, very seriously about how to teach. And I think this has to be a journey that we go through in order to address some of these issues.
So let me just pose this question to anyone here, as well as to panelists. But a lot has been made about the potential for unbundling degrees, but also major programs, and rethinking, to address your point about the complexity of information, rethinking the ways students access material, particularly outside of a traditional major construct, to sample programs outside of that area. And so there's one potential here, which is to build on all of that complexity and the widespread availability of these courses to substantially expand the breadth of a student's training. On the other hand, there's an interest in building curricular modules, particularly gateway courses, with some of the imperatives that Nancy was describing. Those would tend to operate from a different set of pressures that actually would potentially at least narrow the point of training, because the motive is to move people through more efficiently through a system, maybe shorten time to degree. I'm just curious, these are different potentialities. They can be explored and probably will be explored very differently in different institutional settings. But I'm just wondering about how people think of the potential of these technologies and the ways they're implemented for moving our curricula in either of those two directions.
Maybe I can describe the experiment that we're going through now. So we have a number of curricula with extensive core requirements. And it gets to be more and more difficult for students to have any free choice, any possibility to experiment in those curricula. So the question is, how do you allow a student in business, for example, to sample cryptography, to sample robotics, to sample life sciences without investing 3 credits worth of semester hours in a grade that may not turn out so well. And this really gives us an opportunity to do that at scale. We can imagine, for example, a matrix of courses that would allow mechanical engineers to create a sampler in performing arts, for example. And that would be a way of allowing those students to experiment with courses that they frankly wouldn't be able to take otherwise.
And as curriculum gets broken down, we're doing a lot of talking about competencies. We have to back that into learner outcomes, which is the way we talked about it until yesterday. And so aligning expectations of prospective employers around competencies might allow us to break these courses down into smaller units and still be relatively confident that we're gearing people toward preparation for a particular profession.
So if we shift to this competency notion, one of the ways that we establish competency in a lot of curricula is literally by passing courses, establishing your prerequisites to move forward in the curriculum, as opposed to some sort of assessment-based or competency-based model. And we have existing systems, tutorial systems, for example, that bring a student to a campus and provide a fairly personalized curriculum that's designed, we use this oftentimes at the graduate level, to certify that someone's ready for candidacy and then to launch them in the direction of pursuing specialized knowledge to build towards some kind of a capstone project. Do you see the emergence of those kinds of models, or is it more, are we, for the short term at least, pretty much living in the world of courses? Because Coursera is clearly at the moment a model that's built around courses as fundamental units for delivery of curriculum.
Well, since you mentioned tutorials, NUS has a tutorial system, right? It follows quite closely the British system and what we do is that, say for a class of 200, right, we would have 3 hours of lectures and 1 hour of tutorial each week. The lecture is done in big groups of 200-300s, and the tutorials are done in smaller groups of 20. Right. So if you do a calculation, people would think that perhaps by using technology you could save on manpower. May not be the case. So we've been doing this mental arithmetic. If let's say I make available all lectures online, all right, I wrapped around the lectures with tutorials. And certainly you won't want to go with just 1 hour, 1 contact hour. You may just want to increase to 2 contact hours. But if you do the arithmetic, 2 contact hours for 200 students in 10 groups would mean 20 hours. Whereas the traditional lecture is 3 hours plus 10 hours of tutorials, which is 13 hours. So you actually have a significant 1/3 increase in terms of manpower, right? And 2 hours is just like the minimal that you have to extend. If you extend 3 hours, 4 hours, I mean, there's no end to it. So this is one issue which you are thinking about. Yes, I think it's very useful, powerful to be able to wrap around the videos available online, but how do you do it in such a way that it's effective in terms of learning?
Well, and there's a contrarian point here too, which is if you're totally individualized and personalized, it assumes that you are packaging, say, your baccalaureate degree at one place, where from beginning to end you have the individual autonomy to pull and use and draw, and your mentor or your tutor will help guide you through it. But if you are in some kind of economic condition where you have to patch together your education, again, I've promised a system perspective, it's got to be more transportable. So the tug and pull of highly individualized through a tutorial model versus being able to build and make sure you're going to get credit-worthy experiences, I think is a tension we're going to have to live through and work through.
Just following on from Chye's point, is what we're going to see, I think, is the challenge in who does those. If you move to that kind of 200 hours of tutorials, you can't have your highly expensive research professor doing those hours. And I think a big tension that we're starting to emerge amongst our faculty is who's going to do that. If we're going to flip the classroom, if we're going to take the professor online and then have much more personal interaction with the students, who's going to do that? How are we going to fund it? How are we going to train those staff so that the students feel like they're still getting the equivalent experience? And that's something that I think is going to transform a whole range of the way we do things on campus. And with it, thinking about that in the context of a research university, is then what's the model to sustain the research professor after they've done their couple of signature classes? Certainly our system with the reduction in indirect cost for research is going to put big challenges on that, on sustaining that workforce.
So let's turn to pedagogy and the way faculty teach. So there are these assessment tools built into these platforms. There's feedback, as was described yesterday. What are some of the ways in which you think that the deployment of these technologies might shape pedagogy going forward? There's no question that one important effect of this revolution, if you will, is that it's directed a lot of attention to teaching, and it's directed a lot of attention to learning on campuses that arguably should have been paying that attention all along, but perhaps weren't paying it close attention. So what are some of the ways we think it might alter pedagogical technique?
I think it massively increases our diagnostic powers. What we learned in the experiment I'm sure Bill Bowen talked about with Ithaca and Maryland and SUNY and CUNY is that you got more feedback quickly about what students were and weren't learning. I mean, it's just an amazing transformation from you find out at the midterm and you find out at the final, and it's really too late in either case. And I'm exaggerating the old way of doing things, but I think examining pedagogy, and then I think what follows, as Vince alluded to, is that we have not a history of valuing the science of pedagogy, the study of pedagogy, the rewarding of faculty members who investigate their own pedagogy as a legitimate research target for tenure and promotion. Shame on us, but maybe this will be transformative.
What about those of you who have taught courses? So you've moved from a classroom context to this online platform. What are the takeaways in terms of your own teaching that you would nominate as having informed the way you now deal with students on the campus? Anyone?
So we hear, and this is universal across our first cohort of courses. We hear from faculty that thought, I know how to teach this. I've been teaching this for 30 years. Don't bother me with how it's done, what we've done. That this is, in the first place, incredibly harder than teaching in a traditional classroom. And they immediately see lessons that they can carry back to the traditional classroom. I see one of my instructional designers sitting in the back, and he has discussions with faculty where they say, what is a learning outcome? I'm just going to go talk for 45 minutes, right? And so that journey, that kind of emotional, cultural journey that faculty members take to get to this point, I think transforms teaching. You certainly see it in the first set of courses that all of these professors come back and say it's going to transform the way I teach in the classroom.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. The public nature of it itself builds in an accountability system. Most of us go into a classroom where we might occasionally be observed, but most of us are in a setting where there isn't public accountability for what we're doing. But if you put this stuff up on a platform and it's available to hundreds of thousands of people, it does force one to step back and ask, how well am I doing? How well is this serving, etc.
If you co-teach a class, it has the same effect. If you're the only expert in the classroom, it's pretty easy to dominate the agenda. It immediately transforms the way you think about your teaching when the other expert is your colleague who's in your field and knows exactly what you're talking about. And I think that sort of ricochets into the opportunities here. It's exciting.
I guess I'd like to make a comment about numbers here. All right, you guys here are converts, right? But even if I take NUS, I have 2,500 staff, right? I may be able to get 50 who are very enthusiastic about MOOCs and all this. But can I get the rest of the 2,450 to be interested? And if the 2,450 don't change, the system don't change. All right, so that's one of the big issues for large universities like us. And what we are trying to do, at least on our side, I'll be happy to hear if you have other ideas, is that I just would have to increase this critical mass of passionate professors, and people like you, right, within a campus. I think if you have a critical mass, you build a critical mass, then whatever you do, I think will infect the students, and the students would sort of convince the other professors that this is good, and I think you have a viral action. reaction. And I think that's what we hope to do, all right, by building this critical mass. Some of it has to be top directed, right? You have to put in pilots and to push and to sell and to get buy-in for these pilots. But then at the same time, you have to encourage ground-up actions, support, incentivize professors to try these new ways, to learn and, you know, to improve. And we think that this is one way, but I'm not sure how other universities do it.
So I think it may be a smaller hill to climb than you think. We thought that we were going to have to build a critical mass, and we were born with a critical mass. And so the last year has been kind of building a community based on the people that decided to participate initially. And we don't need 80% of the faculty to be enthusiastic about it. We need the faculty that are participating to be enthusiastic.
Well, as a systems approach, we need centers of pedagogy. We need places where people can conveniently come. We have a Learning Commons, which is a technological platform where people can test out and pilot. And we need a common platform. Across 64 campuses, we don't have a common platform for delivery. And could we get along with 8 different platforms? But that's not very efficient. There is an efficiency model embedded in all of this too, and I think we are obliged to provide that support. More people will come if that support is available. Sorry.
Vince, I was just going to follow up on your point about the peer assessment. And I think unless Australian academics are different to their North American and other international colleagues, I think this is going to generate a level of competition and evaluation of academics as teachers in a way that we've always been able to evaluate their research outcomes. And we're going to see that feeding into a whole range of, it'll feed into recruitment, it'll feed into promotion. And I think what we're certainly seeing is that people are wanting to do this because they can see that this, they value themselves as teachers and they want the world to know that. And so I don't think we'll have a problem with motivating faculty. In fact, I think it'll transform, a whole way in which we both evaluate and promote and recruit faculty, I think.
So I don't know how many of you have had questions from graduate students recently that express a certain amount of anxiety about, the academic careers for which they're preparing and concerns that, the immediate question has to do with whether there'll be demand, which I think is based on some overblown assumptions about how rapidly MOOCs will replace classroom instructors. But there's a larger question about preparation of a next generation of instructors and building out training programs to equip our graduate students with the tools that they will need moving into an environment where technology is valued more highly perhaps than it is at the moment. And I'm curious, what sorts of programs are you thinking of putting into place at your campuses if you don't already have them?
I think it's going to precipitate the redesign of the doctoral degree. We've talked a lot about this across the country, but I don't think we've seen radical shifts. 70% of all PhD graduates will go to institutions where teaching is the highest priority, but they still take 30 hours of research methodology and nary an hour of pedagogy. That's not going to work for us. So we have to face our own re-examination of the doctoral pathway and begin preparing PhDs to be the kind of teachers that this kind of technology, not just MOOCs, but all of the online environment is going to require. And we have to take a really serious look at that.
And I think we'll see as we start to look at the way we have, particularly we have graduate students involved in tutorials and teaching assistants, we'll have the kind of apprenticeships that we've had, when we used to teach them to do supervised lab classes, as a PhD supervisor. I think as the mentors evolve, the training of the graduate students will evolve with it.
So there are also the students, not the graduate students, not students on our campuses, but the students off campus, the hundreds of thousands perhaps off campus, and the ways in which that group of students and their participation in the MOOC platform might alter the way we teach students on our own campuses. I'm thinking of the fact that so many of these students are international. The ways it might shape are thinking about the internationalization of the curriculum, for example, or the ways in which students on our campus are, if not actively interacting with people on the MOOC platform, at least using it as a background for instruction. I'm curious on your thoughts about the ways in which, let's focus on the international dimension, for example, how that might shape the way students on campus are being taught.
I think I made a point earlier when we were chatting that I was asked by the journalist yesterday, what value would a Melbourne macroeconomics course have that a US macroeconomics course would not have? And I said, well, the point, I think, from our point of view is that the person who's teaching that course has been teaching to a classroom with maybe 60-70% of his students have been international students. So he's already thinking and would have thought through the challenges of teaching an international cohort. So that's an advantage that we bring. But it also is a challenge for those who haven't been in that kind of situation, and they're going to have to start. It's very different, to teach a group of students from a whole range of different cultures than to teach a group of students, largely drawn with a few here and there from different cultures, and so I think I see this as a huge global benefit for of MOOCs that we will start to have an international cohort of both academics and students who've learned in this very diverse multicultural environment.
And we're still struggling considerably with getting international experiences embedded in our U.S. courses, and the number is still something like under 4% of all students enrolled in post-secondary education in America have any kind of significant international experience. So we have a little time to talk amongst ourselves about how this internationalizes the student experience. We have a program at SUNY where we co-develop courses between a SUNY professor and professors around the globe, so it forces you to think co-curricularly about the design of courses. And we also thought that MOOCs were an efficient way to be able to go abroad, let's say in a work experience, maybe a co-op experience or an internship experience, and still be able to make curricular progress while you were embedded in an international experience. So I think it's more than just learning to teach that suits around the globe, but it actually creates a global experience by sharing this curriculum.
And also, I think bringing the global community back to the residential part of the program is a big deal. Maybe it's because we're so heavily oriented toward graduating engineers, but a lot of Georgia Tech graduates have a plan to work for international corporations. And when we send a student to Barcelona for the summer, it somehow doesn't seem fair that we teach them exactly the same course in Barcelona that they would teach in Atlanta. Collaboration is different. Business models are different. Conflict resolution is different. And one of the really cool things about the whole idea of a MOOC is that you can now open up a window to all that diversity in the Atlanta classroom. So there's one thing to send people to Barcelona, it's another thing to have people from Barcelona and Shanghai and you are actually participating in the course as is running in Atlanta.
I do agree that MOOCs would definitely improve student mobility, and I think one of the critical problems of students when they want to move to another campus is the sort of the fitting of the partner campus curriculum into your host campus curriculum, and that is often difficult. That's why you don't get that many students going for exchanges. And I can see that with MOOC or even more advanced platforms, you may come to a situation where you have a few universities, international universities, partnering with one another to offer joint programs. Like this time around, before I came here, I was in King's College, where we negotiated a joint program with King's College. I can foresee that many universities will do that, and the college, the negotiation that we had with King's College only have about 3 to 5 students in that particular program. But with MOOC, I'm sure it can be scaled up to 30, 50, or even more. Right? So I think there's lots of potential in that.
So there has been, for a number of years, a lot of discussion about the globalization particularly in American universities, and an expectation of a global strategy, right? So institutions have charted different courses by way of defining a global strategy. Some of them are thinking about building literally an international network of campuses that are linked. Others thinking about support systems where they're not campuses, but maybe an array of offices that support research and other kinds of functions for the university. Some are working primarily through partnerships with other institutions. I'm wondering how you see MOOCs, or whether your institutions are actively trying to incorporate MOOCs into a global strategy, either by altering an existing global strategy or by perhaps redefining the strategy that your institution was charting. And since a lot of institutions are represented here, again, it's a general question. Margaret.
Well, I think, as I said, we've had a global strategy for a long time, but we see this as both an opportunity to strengthen our own global strategy, but I guess, a little risk as well, that it does, the Australian higher education system is highly dependent on international students, and we I guess have the concern that this is, and we've been able to do that because of our geography and because of the nature of our population and our immigrant population and so on. But it's actually going to create opportunities for other systems to compete globally in a way that we've done very effectively. So it's both an opportunity, but also, if I think of the system in Australia as a whole, it's a threat for us as well.
Well, I know the conversation is fundamentally about MOOCs, but I think the framework that we're looking at is a larger online approach to degree completion that embeds MOOCs in existing curricula that was residential but can become online, and add to that shorter time to degree, reduced costs, reduced debt because of shorter time to degree, an access to MOOCs from other campuses. I haven't heard that said, but the degree, for instance, imagine a SUNY graduate, and you could say to that graduate, 1/3 of your coursework can emanate from another campus. It can be an online course from a prestigious institution that you wouldn't otherwise have the opportunity to study at, or MOOCs from around the world, and then add to that, this is a vehicle for an international placement, even if by distance, international placement. And then we're trying to think about adding an applied learning experience, which could be either international or domestic. That's a lot of freight to put on online learning, but I think all of it is potentially possible if we can put a ribbon around it and still drive toward either degrees or competencies. I don't think we know how that's all going to come out, but I think it's a much more interesting conversation when you broaden the base to the whole of online learning. Think about where MOOCs can be inserted, and then how you can add to that shorter time to degree, reduced costs, and maybe an applied learning experience that could be international.
So it may not be all about MOOCs, but one of the interesting things to me is that MOOCs have become a metaphor for the assumptions that have kind of fallen away. And if you look at how quickly the discussions have gone, assigning credit for MOOCs, for example. A year ago, that was a very difficult discussion to have, and it seems like every week the ball is being moved farther ahead. And I would
actually every hour.
I think one of the reasons is because we have this concrete thing in front of us. We have now a model for learning-based collaboration that we really didn't have a year ago. And it allows people to think not abstractly about what they might do, but here's a concrete example of what you might do.
I agree.
So another aspect of the global nature of MOOCs, and one that I suppose has to be managed, and again, it's not just about MOOCs, but about technology more generally. We've had for years, the classrooms were the province of a faculty member. We jealously guard the rights of the faculty members to teach the way they want to teach and say what they want to say within perhaps some boundaries, but those boundaries are very wide. The latitude we give is very wide. And we already have instances where students now walk around with movie cameras, essentially, and cell phones in their pockets, videotaping something that seems either hysterical or unconscionable in the classroom. It goes viral. It creates all kinds of if nothing else, public relations issues for institutions and faculty members. Now we have, by design, courses that are being put up with the intention of being broadcast to hundreds of thousands of people in a global context. And the opportunities for mishaps, if you will, or perceived offenses that are, these kinds of issues seem to magnify, at least the potential for them seems to magnify. So how do you imagine that we'll navigate that? Is it through management of course content at the front end, or is it a strategy for just having your ducks in a row by way of public relations damage control at the back end? What's the thinking there?
The first thing is to not get freaked out. This is a hard discussion to have with TAs, for example. So you have graduate students who are watching this traffic on forums and all the wonderful things being said about my favorite professor. You kind of have to back them up and say, this is 3 people out of a class of 70,000. So put that in context. And as you walk back from the scale of a movie, you start to get the idea that we all have really inflated ideas. All have inflated ideas about our brand. We think the brand is going to be kind of broken into shards if anything happens. It's probably not true, and it's probably not a good message to give to course designers. But that being said, and we talked about this at breakfast this morning, there's a kind of interaction that takes place outside the professor's domain, if you will, in a MOOC. And I don't think we know very much about what's happening on the forum. How does it relate to what's going on in the class? How much control should we have over that? That's probably one of the next big things to happen.
We're in a massively explosive environment internationally. We can all think of examples back to the Arab Spring, or to, I mentioned this morning, hearing on the BBC, protests in India over a blog and hundreds of thousands of people gravitating toward a national protest of this particular blog. Our classrooms are now becoming as volatile as international relations. And I think it will require a degree of faculty oversight. I think Margaret mentioned earlier, we have layers of course approval that we've always used and honored, and so we're going to have to sort of help check each other. But there's such a viral nature to this, it will over time build cultural competence, but there'll probably be a few rocky incidents along the way where we learn about the effects of our cultural exchange.
And what about cultural sensitivities or showing graphic materials? I mean, there are cases where the pedagogical cause for doing so is compelling, and nonetheless there may be a lot of resistance to it or unhappiness with it. So how is that navigated? Is that something on your campus you envision a curriculum committee doing? Is it, I'm curious.
Okay. Well, I'm quite philosophical about this because I've dealt with quite a number of incidents last year. If you read the newspaper, you will know about these incidents on cultural sensitivities. The fact is, with all the measures that you put in place, still, I mean, you cannot monitor what the faculty does. And we don't monitor that at all, right? And it's impossible to do that. Really, you have to entrust the faculty, right? This is your turf, do it in a reasonable manner, all right? And just be sensitive to certain things like culture. I guess I'll take Richard's advice that, you just have to be calm about this. Can guarantee you that you'll hear about the incident after it has happened. So it's really how you do damage control rather than how to prevent it. I don't think you can prevent it at all. You can, to some extent, mitigate it, with communications, advice, and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, I think people have a very short memory.
And what about the possibility that you have a country that takes offense to some material and sort of take down notice? Institutionally, how would you respond to that?
I think we just treated it like somebody banned a textbook. You know, we'd be upset, we'd issue a statement, but we'd move on. You know, and I think, you know, we've had that kind of activity previously, but I think it's about training and you know, the mitigation is about training and awareness and raising sensitivities, you know, awareness about cultural sensitivities. But I think at the end of the day, if you defend your faculty, but there's not much you can do about it. And if the Indian press goes viral, there's nothing you can do about it. You just got to wait it out.
I think we are obliged, though, to try to get ahead of it in some respects. We have massive faculty governance structures at our institutions, regardless of institutional type. And I know at SUNY we have 2 faculty governing bodies already have stepped up to form advisory groups to begin to itemize all the risks and all the assets. And we won't get it right, but I think getting ahead of it is to engage a broader base of the faculty in this new age and own it. And then you have an opportunity to take a problem back to that group and say, here it is, it exploded. Because otherwise, I think the institutional responsibility or the liability is going to fall on the heads of, I'm so sorry, the deputy president. And then you're going to be facing a media explanation that's really too viral to explain. So let's set up some collegial dialogue around this. What are our professional organizations saying about MOOCs? Are they helping us think through what some of the responsibilities and liabilities are? They should be.
I would say that there's a categorical difference between a professor standing in front of a live class 45 minutes 3 times a week over a 15-week period and saying whatever comes to the top of mind and creating a designed artifact. So a MOOC is a designed artifact, and I think that there has to be an institutional role, whether or not it's driven by faculty, that treats that design process as a serious process. So if you let, as in the case of Tech, if you let a proposed course on social computing go too far without asking the question, so what examples are you going to use? What images are you going to be showing in Asia or the Middle East to illustrate those points? You've probably not done your job as a designer. Once we get smarter about that and we get more experience, building that kind of design sensibility into the front end, I think will take you a long way.
But it's an interesting point you raised, because the defense, the institutional defense, that we have a hands-off system, and what the faculty member happened to say in passing, etc., it's kind of sort of an uncontrolled event. But when you're in the business of producing all the materials, it's a little bit more difficult from an institutional perspective to say, we were not party to this, because you actually produced all the materials that went up online. So walking that through and figuring out how to manage it through various advisory bodies is something. I know there was a panel earlier today dealing with some of these academic.
I think the libraries can help us too, and I know they've probably been mentioned, but there's a massive network of libraries, which is really, I'm talking about digital material and ways in which we can create some support and review through that system as well to support the coursework development.
It raises another question about instructors and the freedom of instructors to make decisions. Rich, that transition that you described from the first batch of courses being largely, a sort of coalition of the willing, that's kind of what we put together here, and maybe transitioning into something that's a little bit more top-down driven. There's certainly a lot of faculty cultures where the course itself is thought to be the province of the faculty member. There's a strong tradition of course ownership. To what extent is the instructor's relationship to the institution and their sense of propriety over these courses, do you think, shifting as a product of moving into these new territories?
So, I mean, in our case, we'll see. We had some grand plans for handing out templates that all the faculty would use for presentation, and would be told on a daily basis. I just soon use my own. Thank you. And so as we encounter those things, we're going to find out exactly what matters and what doesn't in the course. I'll just come back to my point that there's nothing about producing and distributing a book that's accidental. So you get at every step along the way to as a faculty member, as a department head, as a colleague, to watch what's going on and provide input.
I think I would expect, again, the scrutiny that the instructor, the designers and the team that are working with the faculty who are producing the material, I'd be really surprised if something was produced that, that was going to be insensitive, that we hadn't had a conversation about it beforehand, because of the team-based, it's much more scrutinised because of the team working with the faculty, I think. So that's another risk mitigation strategy. I mean, Deb's here, she put enormous responsibility on her now to scrutinise these things, but I think it is different, and we will see things bubble up. And but we're in a different situation. Your faculty are more independent than ours. Traditionally, I think.
Well, if we put this on a continuum, the individual so-called ownership of the course or the individual faculty member's right to develop the curriculum, the course in a certain way, all the way over to, I have a state responsibility around degree completion, around serving the workforce needs of, in my case, the unit of analysis being a state, even though we have a lot of international students, and put all that aside, we have to go from Professor A owns MOOC or Course A to I have to deliver an educated population using public funds that ensures the economic revitalization and quality of life of the citizens in my state. So I'm not a huge fan of curriculum development being the product of individual ownership of courses. I understand it has to be negotiated, but curriculum development has to go to program development. And I think we put a lot of pressure on our students to make sense out of the point of view of the program because they're the consumers of individually constructed course units, be they MOOCs or online courses or the traditional residential course. So I think we're going to have to meet in the middle somewhere with this high degree of individuality against the parameters that many states are imposing on at least the public universities to be degree sensitive and to be workforce sensitive. And it falls to an institution to get that balance just right between individual autonomy and program design and degree completion. And that's a reality we have to live with.
Just 2 quick points. One, I think it has to be instructor driven. It cannot be top down. I wouldn't like the term top down, but I think it should be top facilitated. But it really has to be instructor driven, and you just have to create, as administrators, we have to create the environment, the incentives to get people in this direction. And I guess, with regards to your comment, different institutions are very different. So you see output as one of your key KPIs. So do I, because NUS, the way that it's being set up, the government funds us significantly, 75%, but it's based on our output, not on the input. And it also has some quality indicators for the output. So the output is actually as important. So my challenge is really, how do I graduate that 7,000 students that I enroll every year, all right, and make sure that they have graduated with sufficiently high caliber and quality to sort of go into the industry.
So in terms of the expectations we place on faculty, now, just take a again, every institution is somewhat different. There's a local culture. But what are some of the ways that you would nominate you think expectations of faculty are most likely to be altered based on these technologies? Is it in this domain of their being asked to be more part of a collective program design enterprise? Is it that we need fewer of them? Is it some upward or downward conversion of their teaching? I'm just curious what you think might be some of the implications downstream for the average working life of a faculty member. Yeah.
So I would say an immediate and really obvious impact has been that it's become incredibly more difficult to be a faculty member at a research university and still need a different undergraduate education. A year ago, I wouldn't have believed the level of discussion, sophistication of discussion on research campuses about undergraduate education. And that's moved the bar significantly. One of the things that you'd like to see is the incentives follow that, so that it really does become an aspect of promotion and tenure decisions, becomes an aspect of hiring, as Nancy says, becomes an aspect of training the next generation of clinicians. But at least that conversation has been kickstarted.
Well, Margaret, go right ahead.
No. Well, I think we're going to see the sort of creation of the products taking away some of the. I hope that we're going to create more time for faculty out of this because some bits of the responsibility for delivering a course that are now like the entire responsibility of the faculty. So finding the TAs, training them, making sure they're marking to the right kind of frameworks and so on, will, I think, become something that becomes more systematised, and that they focus their efforts on the high quality content and the course design. So my hope is that we end up with a better life for our stretched faculty in this, but I think it will change, and it will change the market.
Well, I think part of our topic was the question about the future of residential campuses. So I've been thinking about it in just sort of three buckets. I think we're, with 64 campuses, 30 miles from every New Yorker, and this being the lifeblood of most communities in New York, that campus exists, that it employs the largest percentage of workers in a community, and that it spends the money that keeps everything else alive, from grocery stores to apartments, would suggest that we'd not be eager to give away all of that in the name of online learning. So that's one bucket. We've already had the hybrid bucket. We've got students who are enrolled residentially taking online courses, and it seems to be working pretty well for us. And now we have this exclusively online population. So I think it has immense implications for how we define faculty roles, and instead of assistant associate full, we may go residential, hybrid, online. I mean, we may distribute or differentiate. The term we've used for 30 years in K-12 is differentiated staffing. So it could get really interesting, and rank might not be as important as place or focus, because I'm hard pressed to believe that these residential campuses are going to go away. What worries me about the residential campus is that it becomes a home for the elite, and it is no longer serving a broad base of population from low income to high income. And I think we should be worrying about that, even though I think low income and first generation students are going to be greatly better served by online and MOOC instruction. It's not an obvious, it's a very, very complex transition we're in the midst of.
Yeah. Well, I think the fact that the MOOC revolution has really ignited a lot of rethinking about higher education. I think this is very healthy. And I'm glad that a lot of the universities here actually initiated this. Very happy to be part of this journey, and also very excited about what are the things to come. I think the future, of course, you can never tell. All right, how things would turn out. I think our topic is more on the future of the 21st century campus. Right, even just looking at a classroom by itself. Concept of a classroom now and the concept of a classroom 20 years from now, I think will be very different. I'm sure that whatever you think the classroom will be, 20 years from now will be very different. Right? But I think there's something positive, and I hope that what you all are doing right now would ignite a sort of a viral reaction across every part of the world. Right? I have tremendous respect for American universities. I think you're very innovative, you're very resilient, and we're looking forward for you to lead the change.
The answers on the way. No, just to follow up on what you said, I do have written on this card the answers to all of these questions separately, privately. But I think that the interesting thing about institutions of higher learning is that they are, in a powerful way, small c conservative institutions. I mean, we wear medieval gowns, we behave in ways that consciously connect ourselves back centuries. And we try to defend what is important to hold on to, right? So there's a natural drag on innovation that's a productive drag, because you don't want to too quickly give up the things that constitute the core of your mission and have value. At the same time, it's easy to use those traditions as an excuse, particularly when there is a lack of accountability from the outside, to just persist in doing things that really have no good reason for surviving, right? So some of the things that we're doing that don't look all that different from things that happened in the 14th century probably should be eliminated because they're just unproductive. So my hope is that the experimentation that all of us are engaged in, regardless of where it leads, will give us a couple of multiple institutional models for how to strike that balance in ways that are productive for different sectors, of higher education, and that they then become attractive models to emulate and revise, accordingly. But I think differentiating faculty roles, and the other interesting thing I'll say too is, Nancy mentioned this, most of what we've talked about are issues that have been at play for decades. Right? They weren't caused by these technological changes, but they are accelerated in powerful ways by these changes. So it will be very interesting to see how things play out and whether the life of a faculty member changes radically, whether classrooms change dramatically. I will say just in the past year, I have started to pay more attention to the new buildings we're putting up. When you see the empathy of the classroom, part of the design, you stop and you ask yourself, if we're building for 50 years, does that investment make sense? And that's a positive thing. It's a very positive thing. Another positive thing is that we're arriving at the end of this session and heading toward lunch.
No offense taken.
But before we do this, a last round of thanks. I would like to thank in particular the teams of people, literally dozens of people here on campus and out west at Coursera who have supported this conference. I'd like to mention in particular a few. At Coursera, Relly Brandman, Clara Ng, Mark Pan, and Peng Wei. And here at Penn, Lynn Hunter, Jesse Burns, Deirdre Woods, Amy Bennett, and Lauren Owens. They have been busily at work throughout the conference, but months in advance, doing excellent work, and I'd like to thank them and ask you to join me. Secondly, I would like to thank very publicly in a way that I think all of us feel palpably. I'd like to thank Daphne and Andrew for confusing us so much over the past year. And I mean this in the most positive way. Things do work at warp speed. We have been pressed. I have been pressed personally to way out in front of where I ought to be as provost. And that's, again, that's a good thing. And so I'd like all of us to thank them for their leadership and vision in putting us in this wonderful position.